My name is Coralie Renault. I'm 27 years old. When I was 21, my parents emptied the $11,400 I had spent 4 years saving for college and handed it to my older brother Thierry without asking me. Then my mother sat across from me at the kitchen table in Sudbury, Ontario, and said the sentence she had been saying since I was old enough to have anything worth taking. "He's your brother. Family carries family." When I said it wasn't fair, she told me I was being selfish. When I stopped pretending to agree, she told me I was the problem in this family, and that I should think carefully about whether I actually wanted to be part of it. I left that weekend with 2 bags and a bus ticket I bought with cash I had kept in a tin under my bed, because I had already learned not to trust a bank account with her name on it. 3 years later, I got a call from my father on a Tuesday night. Not my mother. My father, who had spent my entire childhood quietly leaving rooms whenever something difficult walked into them. He said, "Coralie, Enos is in trouble. You're the only one who can do anything about this." I laughed, and I need to explain that laugh, because everything in this story depends on it. But first, if you've ever been the one your family expected to hold everything together while someone else was allowed to fall apart, take a second to like and subscribe. I want to talk to you specifically. Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to Sudbury, because you cannot understand that Tuesday night call until you understand the rule our family lived by. There was one rule. Nobody ever said it out loud, but everyone followed it, as if it had been written down somewhere official and signed. Thierry came first. My brother was 5 years older than me, and by the time I was old enough to notice the pattern, it was already too set to question. If there was one helping left, Thierry got it. If something got broken, I had probably provoked him. If we both wanted the same thing, the fair solution was always that I stepped aside. My mother had a sentence for every one of those moments, and she used it so often it stopped sounding like words. "He's your brother. Family carries family." I heard it at 9, when Thierry wanted the last slice of birthday cake. My birthday cake. I heard it at 11 when his hockey gear cost so much that my skating lessons got cancelled, and nobody thought to apologize. I heard it at 13 when he decided he wanted the basement room, the one with the separate entrance. And my father spent a Saturday moving my furniture down the hall, without once asking whether that was all right with me. Nobody ever asked. That was the thing. It wasn't that they didn't care, or maybe it was, but by then it was so automatic that I think they genuinely couldn't see it as a choice anymore. It just was the way things were. My father had a particular way of not helping. He didn't openly agree with my mother, and he didn't openly disagree with her either. He just found something that needed his attention in another room, a faucet to check, a car to look at. He had a gift for disappearing from conversations at exactly the moment they required something of him. And by the time he drifted back, it was always already settled. Settled meant I had lost. I used to think he privately disagreed with her. It took me until I was much older to understand that silence in a house like ours is not neutral. Silence is a vote. I want to be honest about Thierry, because it would be easy to make him a cartoon villain, and he wasn't one. He could be genuinely funny. He remembered things people told him and brought them up later in ways that made you feel seen. When he was in a good mood, he was the kind of person you wanted around. But there was always the other version, the one that appeared when he needed something. The warmth would switch off, and you'd realize it had always been a transaction. He was charming until it cost him something. Then the bill got handed somewhere else. There was an afternoon, when I was 12, that I still think about more than I probably should. I had gotten a perfect score on a math test, not just a good mark, the highest in my class, and I came home wanting to show someone. My mother was on the phone. Thierry had gotten into some kind of argument that had become a crisis by our family's standards. She covered the receiver with her hand, looked at my paper, said, "Not now, Coralie," and turned back to the wall. I put the test in a folder. She never asked about it. That was the day I started to understand something. Good news from me was an inconvenience. Bad news from Thierry was an emergency worth reorganizing the entire house around. I filed it away, and I got very good at not needing anyone to look at my results. The first time I watched the full machine run at speed, I was 15. Thierry, 20 by then, had gotten into some kind of financial trouble. I caught only pieces of it through walls and half-closed doors. My parents handled it inside the family, the way they always said things should be handled. And after it was handled, the household went quieter about money for a while. And a thing that had been loosely promised to me, a school trip I had been looking forward to for months, quietly disappeared from the calendar without anyone explaining why. I didn't know yet that this pattern had a shape. I just knew, somewhere in my body before my mind had words for it, that when Thierry fell, I was the one who paid for the landing. I started saving when I was 16. I want you to understand what that actually means. I got a job at a Tim Hortons near our house the summer I turned 16. I worked weekends, then added evening shifts when I could get them, and I saved almost everything I made. I wasn't saving for something vague. I was saving for the practical nursing program at the college in Sudbury. I had already looked it up, printed the prerequisites, written the application deadline in my planner. I knew what I wanted and I knew what it cost, and I was going to get there by myself. Because I was a minor when I opened the account, the bank required an adult cosigner. My mother's name went on it alongside mine. I didn't think about what that meant. I was 16. You don't imagine your own mother as a liability. For 4 years, I put almost everything I made into that account. I skipped things. Said no to things other people my age did without thinking twice. I told myself it was worth it because that money was a door, and I had built it shift by shift, one tip and one paycheck at a time, and I could see it from where I was standing. By the fall I turned 21, I had $11,400 in that account. I used to check the balance just to feel solid. That same fall, Thierry's restaurant failed. He'd taken over a place downtown with a business partner 2 years earlier, and when it collapsed, it took a lot with it. The business, the apartment he'd rented above it, most of his confidence. He came home the way he always came home when things went wrong, as a catastrophe that required the whole family to reorganize itself around him. I felt for him. I did. Whatever else was true, he was struggling, and I wasn't cold to that. But I also felt the air change the way it does before a storm. That particular pressure drop I'd been learning to recognize since I was a kid. And I knew, the way you know something in your body before your mind catches up, that a bill was about to come due, and it was going to have my name on it. My mother called me into the kitchen in November. She didn't ask. People don't believe this part when I tell it, she informed me. She said Thierry needed help getting back on his feet. That family carries family, and that they had already moved my savings to help him get started again. Already moved, past tense, 11,400, gone before I sat down. Because her name was on the account, and she didn't need my permission. I asked how she could do that. I asked what I was supposed to do about school, about the nursing program I had spent 4 years building toward, and she looked at me with something that almost resembled disappointment, like I was the one behaving badly, and she said it. The sentence. He's your brother. Family carries family. Stop being so selfish. I didn't yell. I have replayed that moment so many times and I didn't yell. I just went still. I stopped nodding, stopped softening my face into the expression that meant everything was fine. I said quietly that it wasn't right. That was all I said, that it wasn't right. My mother's face closed like a door. She said if I couldn't be grateful, if I was going to bring this kind of attitude into the house, when the family needed to pull together, then maybe I needed to think carefully about whether I really wanted to be here. I looked toward the hallway. My father was standing at the edge of it, half in the doorway. For 1 second, his mouth opened. I waited. I gave him the whole second. He closed it. He looked at the floor. I packed that weekend. clothes, my documents, the nursing program brochure I had folded and unfolded so many times the creases had gone soft, and the hollow feeling where $11,400 used to be. I took the cash from the tin under my bed, and I left on a Sunday morning, and the sound the front door made when it shut behind me was so ordinary it nearly broke me. Thierry was in the kitchen when I walked out, pouring a coffee. He didn't say sorry, he didn't say stay. He said, "You'll be back. You always figure it out." I have never fully decided whether he meant that kindly. I took a bus east to Ottawa, about 450 kilometers, far enough that nobody would drop by unannounced, big enough to disappear into for a while, and it had Algonquin College, which had the nursing pathway I needed. The first year was hard in the way only people who have been there can truly understand. I got a job at a long-term care residence, cleaning at first, then personal support work as I got my certification, and I rented a room in a shared house and sat on the floor some nights with a calculator, watching the numbers stay too small for too long. I thought about the balance I used to check on my phone. I let myself be furious for exactly as long as it took to fall asleep, then I got up and went in. The person who changed it was Monique. She was a charge nurse at the residence, about 15 years older than me, Quebecoise, with the kind of bluntness that could strip paint off a wall and also somehow make you feel completely safe. She noticed I was skipping lunch before I had told anyone I was skipping lunch. One evening she just said, in the flat, non-negotiable way she had, "You're staying at mine until you're on your feet. The spare room is yours." I started to calculate what I'd owe her, how I'd pay it back, what the terms were. She watched my face do it and she cut me off. "That's not how this works." I had never known it worked any other way. Nobody had ever shown me that it did. I sat in her spare room that first night, and I cried the way you cry when someone is kind to you without conditions, and you don't have a category for it. I didn't know what to do with something that wasn't a loan. I got my RPN certification that year. Then I kept going, working shifts between semesters, chipping away at the prerequisites for the full nursing degree. There was one semester I almost quit. A clinical placement that went badly, a supervisor who made me feel like I had no business being there. And I sat in my car in a hospital parking lot on a November evening and seriously considered walking away from all of it. Because some part of me still believed the old story my family had told about me. That I was fine, I could manage, I was the strong one, which also meant I wasn't the one who got to need things. I called Monique. She let me talk. Then she said, "You're exhausted. Exhausted isn't the same as wrong." I went back inside. Somewhere in those years I said no to my mother for the first time. She called asking me to send money to help Thierry cover rent, a few $100s. And she said it the way she always did, like of course I would. I was sitting in my kitchen in Ottawa after a 12-hour shift, and I typed the shortest thing I had ever sent her. "I can't right now. I'm sorry." She called back within the hour, not to understand, to tell me I was choosing my own comfort over family, that I had always been selfish, and she supposed she shouldn't be surprised. I let the next call go to voicemail. I lay awake that night feeling like I'd done something monstrous. I hadn't. I had just declined to hold out an empty hand so someone else could feel better about taking from it. But it felt monstrous because I had never been allowed to do it before. Guilt, I was learning, doesn't care whether you've actually done something wrong. It's just an old alarm going off in a house you used to live in. I passed my licensing exam and became a registered nurse. I took a position on a pediatric unit, which is not where most new graduates land, but steadiness in hard moments turned out to be something I had spent years building without meaning to, and it was worth more in that work than almost anything else. I got good at it. I want to be clear about one thing because I know how these stories can sound. I did not become wealthy. I became a person with a license, a salary that covered rent and then some, and a skill that lived in my hands instead of in a bank account with someone else's name on it. That turned out to be a kind of security that nothing could be transferred out of without my consent. The one thread I couldn't cut completely was Ines. Thierry had a daughter. She had come along a few years after I left, from a relationship that fell apart badly, and Enos was small and watchful the way kids get when the adults around them are unpredictable. He would use me as childcare when it suited him. I'd drive out for a weekend, or he'd bring her up to Ottawa, and for 2 days I was someone's safe person. I showed up because saying yes to Thierry was the only way I got to see her. Enos kept a stuffed bear I'd bought her for her 3rd birthday. She called it Coco. Everyone thought that was charming. I thought it was something else, something quieter and more important, and I couldn't have explained exactly why until much later. By the start of this year, I had built something I was genuinely proud of: my own apartment, a job I cared about, Monique at one end of the phone, and 2 colleagues I trusted at the other. For the first time in my adult life, it actually felt like mine. Then my father called on a Tuesday evening. Not my mother. My father, the man who had spent my entire childhood looking at the floor whenever the truth walked into a room. He was careful at first, vague. He said Thierry was going through something difficult, that Enos needed stability, that they had been managing, but it was becoming too much. He thought that maybe I should come and see. I asked where Enos was right now. He said she was with them, for now. For now. 2 words that landed wrong in my chest, in a way I couldn't quite name. I asked how long she had actually been there. He said a little while, a few weeks, maybe more. I told him I would think about it. I didn't sleep. In the morning I called Monique and described what I knew. She listened, and then she said the thing I already understood and had been circling around. A child's well-being is not a family matter you manage quietly. If something is actually wrong, it goes through the proper channels. You know this. I took 2 days of personal leave and drove the 450 kilometers back to Sudbury. I told myself I was going for one reason only. There was a 4-year-old somewhere in that house with a stuffed bear named after me, and I needed to see with my own eyes that she was okay. I went to my parents' house, the house I had left with 2 bags and a tin of cash. Ines answered the door. She was holding Coco. She looked up at me and her whole face changed the way a face does when someone safe walks in. Then she said, in that matter-of-fact way small children have when they are delivering the most important thing in the world as if it's ordinary. Aunt Corey, are you staying this time? Are you staying this time? 4 years old, and she had already learned to ask that. Inside, I noticed things the way I notice things at work, which is not the same as noticing them as a family member. I noticed that Enos was quieter than she had been on our last visit. I noticed the particular tiredness in her eyes, the way she stayed close to me and didn't go off to explore the way kids her age usually do. I noticed that my mother kept steering me away from certain rooms and certain questions, and that my father wouldn't quite meet my eyes, and that nobody wanted to say directly where Thierry was or what was actually wrong. They gave me the version they had prepared. Thierry was struggling. Things were hard. They were helping out, but it was becoming too much for them at their age. And then my mother said it, gently, like she was offering something generous. You take her, quietly, just between us. No outside involvement, no complications. You've always been so good with her. You know how to handle things. No outside involvement, no complications. I had heard those words before, in different arrangements. Then I saw what was on the refrigerator, half tucked under a magnet, which was maybe not accidental. A letter from Ines' daycare. At the top of it, 3rd notice. Before I tell you what that letter unraveled, I want to ask you something. Based on everything I've told you about this family, what do you think they were actually afraid of? Not what they told me they were worried about. What they were really protecting. Drop your answer in the comments. I read them, and I want to know what you think before I tell you what I found. 3rd notice. I stood at that refrigerator and read it twice. The daycare was requesting contact regarding Enos' attendance and well-being. 3rd notice, which meant there had been a 1st and a 2nd, and someone in this house had received them and done nothing. I asked my mother, keeping my voice very level, how long Ines had actually been living there. A few weeks, she said, a month at most. That afternoon, a woman from their street came by. Her name was Kathleen, a neighbor my mother knew from church, the kind of person who notices things and shows up with food when there's trouble. She saw me, a face she half remembered, and she reached out and squeezed my arm and said, "Oh, thank goodness. We've all been so worried about that little one for months. I'm just so relieved somebody finally came." Months. Not a few weeks, months. And we've all been worried, a whole street, a whole circle of people who had been watching. And nobody inside that house had picked up the phone to the one person in the family who happened to be a pediatric nurse, until a third notice was sitting on the refrigerator and outside eyes were getting close. My mother steered Kathleen toward the kitchen with practiced smoothness, toward coffee, away from me. I stood in the hallway and let the arithmetic finish itself. They hadn't called me when it started. They had called me when they were about to be seen. I went to find Ines because I needed to be near her more than I needed to be right about anything. She was in the back room, lining up the same 4 toys in the same order, over and over. The patient, repetitive play of a child who is managing something too heavy for her. I sat down on the floor beside her. She leaned into my side without a word, the way she used to when she was tiny, and she said, in the voice children use when they are telling you something enormous as if it's ordinary, "Daddy went away again." Grandma said, "Don't tell. Don't tell." A 4-year-old had been handed a secret to keep, and she was keeping it, because the adults she loved had asked her to. I recognized it in my whole body, because I had been that child. Taught that the family's comfort depended on my silence. Taught that keeping things quiet was the price of being loved. The pattern hadn't just repeated. It had reached down a generation and put its hands on Ines, and nobody in that house had even noticed they were doing to her exactly what they had spent years doing to me. That was the moment my last hesitation died. I asked if I could look through Ines's things to know what she'd need if she came to stay with me for a while. My mother, eager to seal what she thought was a quiet agreement between us, let me into the room where Thierry's boxes were stacked. I was looking for pajamas, for the spare bear, that was all. But I found something. Mixed into an unsorted folder of papers, the kind nobody goes through, an old bank statement, Thierry's, from 6 years back, and a deposit on it, $11,400. Dated the same month my mother had told me she'd already moved my savings. I sat down on the floor of that room with the paper in my hands. For 3 years I had told myself a story about the $11,400, that it had gone somewhere necessary, into some vague family emergency I'd never been given the full details of, because they never gave me details. I had made a kind of peace with the vagueness, because the vagueness let me believe it had mattered, that some real crisis had needed it. It hadn't gone into a crisis. It had gone directly into Thierry's bank account, the same month they emptied mine and told me I was selfish for minding. Dollar for dollar, my tuition, my nursing program, my door, transferred into my brother's account so he'd have a cushion while I had a bus ticket. It wasn't a family emergency. It had never been a family emergency. It had been a transfer, and they had dressed it in the word family so I'd say thank you while they did it. I kept looking. I found the other thing. A recent letter from a lender. My parents' names on it as co-signers on a debt of Thierry's, a reminder that as co-signers, they remained responsible for the outstanding balance. And there it was. The real reason for the Tuesday call. Not Ines. Not worry. The co-signed debt was coming due, Thierry had disappeared, a third notice was on the refrigerator, and the neighbors had been talking for months. If this went through any official channel, if the daycare's concern became a report, if a children's aid worker came to the door, if Ines's living situation became part of any kind of record, everything else could surface with it. The months of neglect they had known about. The money. The picture of a family that had protected one adult at the expense of everyone around him, including a 4-year-old. No outside involvement wasn't about protecting Enos. It was about protecting the story. I called Monique from my car. I told her more this time. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Coralie, who is the stable one here? Who has the apartment, the income, the nursing license, the documented relationship with this child?" When someone from Children's Aid looks at this family and asks who can safely take this little girl, who do you think they're going to see? I hadn't let myself think about it in those terms yet, but once she said it, I couldn't unknow it. My mother thought she was asking me for a favor. My father thought they were handing the hard thing to the capable one, the way they always had. Neither of them understood what they had actually built. They had spent 27 years making me the reliable one, the one with a career, the one who showed up, the one Enos already trusted. In any honest accounting of this family, I was the only stable adult in the picture. I wasn't the one asking to be let back in. I was the one holding the door. I drove back to Ottawa to think. I didn't trust myself to make this decision breathing that house's air. I sat at Monique's kitchen table and laid it all out, and she asked me the one thing I needed to hear. "Okay, say you do this, why? Is it for Enos? Or is it to finally be the one they need, to finally be seen after all this time?" She held the question open between us. Because part of me wanted that. A real part. I wanted my mother to watch me be the person she had thrown out at 21, rebuilt, and never gone looking for. I wanted my father to see, finally, what he had chosen to look away from. That hunger was real, and I knew, sitting there, that if I acted from it I would end up back in the same pattern wearing a different costume. The capable one, riding in to hold everything together, grateful just to be needed. Doing it quietly, off the books, no outside involvement, no complications. So I wasn't going to do it quietly. I would take care of Enos, but I would do it properly. Through Children's Aid, with a formal kinship arrangement, with paperwork, and a caseworker who knew what was happening. Not a quiet handoff in a kitchen. A real process. The kind that stays real regardless of what anyone in that family later decides to rearrange. The dark was what they wanted. The light was what would actually protect her. I spoke with a caseworker named Andrea and described what I had seen. She said she would follow up and schedule a visit. By the time I drove back to Sudbury, the visit had already been arranged. That was why we were all in one room that afternoon. Me, my mother, my father, Thierry, who had resurfaced and pulled himself together for the occasion, and Andrea with a folder and a calm, unhurried face. Thierry was good in a room. He always had been. He was warm, rueful, completely in control of the version he was offering. "Every family goes through rough patches," he told Andrea. "We handle things ourselves. I just need a bit of time to get sorted, and then Enos comes home with me. We always figure it out." My mother kept the conversation moving in the direction she wanted, the conductor of an orchestra she had been leading my entire life, and for a few minutes it was working. The story they were telling was smooth and reasonable, and the room was starting to settle into it. Then I put the daycare notice on the table. I didn't raise my voice. I just slid it to the center where everyone could see the words at the top. "Third notice," I said, and the neighbor who stopped by mentioned she'd been worried for months. Not weeks. Months. So someone in this room has known about this for a long time. The temperature in the room changed. My mother recovered fast. She always did. She switched tracks so smoothly it might have been impressive under other circumstances. Her voice filled with practiced hurt. "You weren't here, Coralie. You left. You don't get to come back after 3 years and stand in judgment. You chose to go." The oldest move in her book. Turn the person telling the truth into the one who abandoned everyone. A year ago, that might have worked on me. I let it sit. I didn't defend myself, because defending myself was the trap. "You're right," I said. "I wasn't here. Let's talk about why." I didn't produce the bank statement. I didn't need to wave it around the room like a weapon. I just said the shape of it plainly for everyone there. 3 years ago, you took the money I had saved for my education and you gave it to Thierry. You told me I was selfish for objecting and you made it clear I should leave. So no, I wasn't here. You made sure of that. My mother started to speak. I kept going, still quiet. I'm not bringing that up to relitigate it. I'm bringing it up because it's the same thing happening right now. Last time, it was my future that paid for Thierry's landing. This time, it's a 4-year-old. Thierry shifted. He turned to Andrea with a softer, more wounded expression. She's been angry at our parents for years and she's using Ines to make a point. That's what this actually is. It was almost a smart move. Reframe the only stable adult in the room as the unstable one. Andrea didn't take the bait. She simply asked Thierry to walk her through the last 60 days, where Ines had slept each week, who had taken her to daycare, who had received the notices. I watched my brother try to build 2 months out of nothing. The dates didn't connect. The names kept shifting. Every sentence he offered became one more thing that didn't add up. Then Andrea looked around the table and asked the question that ended the performance. Let me ask it plainly, who here can provide a stable, safe, documented home for Inez right now? Silence. My mother opened her mouth and closed it, because the honest answer to that question was sitting in the room, and it wasn't her. It wasn't my father. It wasn't Thierry. It was the daughter they had emptied and pointed toward the door. Every eye moved to me, the one who hadn't been there, the one who was, in fact, the only one who could. I let the quiet do the work. Then I said the thing I had driven 900 kilometers to be able to say. You didn't call me to help, I said to my mother quietly. You called me because I'm the only one who can. Those aren't the same thing. Her whole posture shifted. She went from issuing terms to negotiating for them in the space of a single breath. Then my father stood up. He hadn't said a word the entire meeting. He had sat at the end of the table and looked at his hands and at the floor. And then he stood, and his voice was unsteady, and he looked at me, not at the table, not at the floor, at me, and he said, "There's something you need to know about the money." My mother said his name. He kept going anyway. It was the bravest thing I had ever seen him do, which tells you everything you need to know about how low the bar had been set. When we took your savings, he said, we told you it was for the family. We let you believe it was some kind of emergency we all shared. He stopped. He started again. It went to Thierry, directly into his account. We took what you had built, and we handed it to your brother so he would have a softer place to land, and then we called you selfish for minding. He looked at me. His eyes were wet. You have been paying for his landings your entire life. We arranged it that way. I stood in that hallway and I let it happen, and I never once said stop. I already knew. I had found the paper. But knowing something and having it said out loud in front of other people are not the same thing. Something I had been carrying for 3 years, something I hadn't even fully recognized as weight until that moment, put itself down. And in the quiet that followed, the last piece turned over. The phrase they had pinned on me since I was old enough to have anything worth taking. He's your brother. Family carries family. It wasn't about love. It wasn't even really about Thierry. It was a permission slip, the sentence that let them take from me without it being called taking. If I was the capable one, I could spare it. If I could spare it, then taking it wasn't theft. It was just what family does. Strong was the word that meant my needs could always wait. I had believed it for so long that I had built my entire sense of myself around it. And sitting there in that room, I understood something I hadn't expected. The strength was real. I had built it myself, in shared houses and parking lots and clinical placements and mornings when I got up and went in anyway. It had never belonged to them. They had only named it. Which meant I got to decide what it was for. I looked at Thierry. The performance was gone from his face. He wasn't cruel in that moment. He was just scared and small in the way people get when they run out of things to hide behind. I felt the old pull to soften it for him, to make it easier. I didn't. But I didn't say anything sharp either. There was a child 2 rooms away, and nothing happening in that room was a victory. I'm not here to burn anything down, I said to him. I'm here to stop covering for you. Those are different things. He asked me one question. It was the only thing he said that day that suggested he might, someday, be capable of something better. He didn't ask what would happen to him. He asked, "Is Ines going to be okay?" "Yes," I said. "I'm going to make sure of it." And then Ines came and found us, the way children do when they've been listening nearby without quite knowing what for. She walked in holding Coco and came and stood beside Zatish, without a word, close, the way she had always stood beside me. She tugged my sleeve. "Can we go to your house? It's quieter there." 4 years old. Already keeping a careful tally of which adults were safe. She had chosen me long before that room. I just hadn't understood, until then, what all those weekends I had shown up to, the free childcare I had swallowed my pride over, the visits I resented Thierry for arranging, had actually been building. The one bond in this entire story that nobody could transfer out of a joint account, sign away, or quietly hand to someone else. I made my choice, and I said it where no one could rewrite it later. I'll take responsibility for Ines. I won't take responsibility for all of you. Not anymore. That truth didn't break me. It let me go. With Andrea's support, Ines came home with me that evening, under an emergency kinship arrangement, with the formal process begun. I drove the 450 kilometers north, and this time the back seat wasn't empty. There was a 4-year-old asleep, with Coco tucked under her chin, and when she woke up somewhere around North Bay and asked where we were going, I told her we were going home. She looked out the window at the dark trees. Then she said okay and went back to sleep. The consequences my parents had worked so hard to avoid arrived anyway, on their own, without any help from me. The co-signed debt didn't disappear because I had shown up. The inquiry into the months of neglect went where it needed to go. The bill for a lifetime of protecting Thierry's landings finally came due, and it wasn't mine to pay. I didn't cause it, I just stopped standing in front of it. Thierry called once, furious, and when fury didn't move me, he switched to devastated, and he used the sentence that had been running our whole lives. "We're family. How can you do this to family?" I noticed I wasn't afraid of it anymore. It used to land like a verdict. Now it just sounded like a key, trying a lock it had never actually fit. "I'm not doing anything to you," I told him. "I stopped paying for your consequences. Those are different things." He hung up, but he called back a few days later, quieter, and that quiet, just his voice, without a demand underneath it, was the most honest sound I had heard from him in years. My mother tried the version that had always worked. She called crying, and she said that we had all made mistakes, and that we should move forward as a family, all of us together. Notice what that sentence does. It spreads the guilt out so thin that nobody is responsible for anything specific, and it invites me to be the bigger person one final time and just let it dissolve into the word family. "Name yours," I said. "Name the specific thing. Then we can talk about moving forward." There was a silence on the line. My mother, who had always had a sentence ready for every occasion in my life, did not have one for that. My father wrote me a letter a few weeks later. Actual handwriting, on paper, which he had never done. He didn't spread anything out into vagueness. He wrote, "I stood in hallways for 20 years and let things happen because it was easier than saying, 'Stop.' I made that choice. It was the wrong one." He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask to be let back in. He just named the specific thing he had done. I didn't open the door to everyone because of that letter. Forgiveness and access are not the same thing, and I had finally learned the difference between them. But I wrote him back. Just him. One narrow door, left slightly open, for the one person who had finally chosen to stop looking at the floor. It has been a few months now. Ines is enrolled in a daycare here in Ottawa. She goes every day. She sleeps through the night, mostly. She has a permanent spot at Monique's kitchen table. Monique adopted the two of us the way she seems to adopt everyone worth keeping, and she calls Monique La Dame aux Chats because of the two cats, and it has become a whole thing I wouldn't trade for anything. The formal guardianship is still working through its steps, the way real things do. But it is real, and it is on record, and it cannot be undone on someone's whim. Monique came by last week and watched Enos color at the kitchen table, humming to herself, relaxed in the boneless way children get when they finally believe the ground is going to hold. Monique said very quietly, "Regardless, that's what safe looks like." I had to leave the room for a minute. Last night, Enos called down the hall after I put her to bed, half asleep, doing the thing kids do when they just want to confirm that the world is still where they left it. "Aunt Corey?" "I'm here," I said. A pause. "Then is this ours?" "Yes," I told her, "this is ours." And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I said it without any part of me bracing for it to be taken back. That is why I laughed when my father called on a Tuesday night and told me my niece was in trouble and I was the only one who could do anything about it. Not because anyone was hurting. Not because any of it was funny. Because for my entire life, that family had handed me the bill for every landing, called it love, and named me the strong one so I would say thank you while they did it. And the girl who used to say thank you had taken a bus 450 kilometers east and built something nobody could put their name on without her permission. That strength was mine. It had always been mine. And now I knew exactly what it was for.